Let's get one thing straight right off the bat. We spend a lot of time talking about which language is going to win. You know the drill. Will it be Mandarin because China is an economic superpower? Spanish because half the Americas speak it? Hindi because India is the world's most populous nation? French because, well, Africa is rising? Everywhere you look, there's a ranking, a hot take, a prediction about the one true heir to English. Here's the problem. That question, which language will be the next global superpower, assumes something that isn't true. It assumes that the world works like a monarchy, that when one king steps down, another takes the throne, that global communication is a zero-sum game where one language dominates and all others submit. But history doesn't actually work that way, and the future definitely doesn't. The world is not moving toward a single new global language. It's moving toward something much messier, much more interesting, and much more human. We're moving toward a world where power is shared, where English remains crucial, but no longer sits alone at the top, where 5 or 6 major languages coexist as serious players on the global stage. This isn't speculation. This is data. This is migration. This is demography. And if you're a native English speaker, the comfortable era when everyone else learned your language while you learned nothing is already ending. So let's stop asking which language will replace English. That's the wrong question. The right question is this: who will join English at the table? And how do we prepare for a world where speaking only one language is no longer enough? Let's start with the one language everyone loves to fight about: Mandarin, the sleeping giant. On paper, Mandarin Chinese looks like the obvious successor to English. It already has more native speakers than any other language on Earth. China is the world's second largest economy. It's a military powerhouse, a technological innovator, and an increasingly aggressive exporter of its culture and influence. And the Chinese government is serious about spreading the language. Mandarin has now been incorporated into the national education systems of 86 countries around the world. That's a staggering number. The total number of international Chinese learners and users has surpassed 200 million people. Even in the United States, where anti-China sentiment has been politically useful for years, the number of American students learning Mandarin exploded in early 2025, jumping an incredible 216% year on year. So Mandarin has the numbers, the economic backing, and the government support. What's the catch? Geography. Nearly all of Mandarin's 1.1 billion native speakers live in one country. One. Unlike English, which spread across dozens of nations through colonialism, trade, and cultural export, Mandarin remains heavily concentrated in Greater China. You can travel from London to Lagos to Lima and find English speakers everywhere. You cannot do that with Mandarin. This isn't to say Mandarin won't grow in importance. It absolutely will. Anyone doing business with China or engaging with its supply chains will need it. But the idea that Mandarin will become the default second language for the entire world, the new English, ignores a simple fact. Language power isn't just about how many people speak it, it's about how far they're spread. Mandarin is a sleeping giant, but it's a giant that sleeps in one bed. Spanish and the reliable powerhouse. Now let's talk about Spanish. If you want a safe bet for the future, this is it. Spanish currently has nearly 600 million speakers across more than 20 countries. That's a global footprint that already rivals English. It's the official language of most of Central and South America, plus Spain, plus Equatorial Guinea. It's everywhere. But the real story is the United States. Right now, the United States already has the second largest population of Spanish speakers in the world, after Mexico. The country's Hispanic population, currently around 19% of the total, is projected to rise to nearly 27% by 2050. In absolute numbers, that means somewhere between 100 and 138 million Spanish speakers living inside the world's most powerful economy. Think about what that means. By 2050, the United States will likely surpass Mexico as the largest Spanish-speaking nation on the planet. The country with the world's biggest military, the world's most influential tech sector, and the world's most dominant entertainment industry will also be a majority Spanish-speaking country in many regions. That is not a minor detail. That is a fundamental reshaping of global linguistic power. There's already rhetoric about Spanish replacing English as the primary language of the United States within a few decades. Whether that happens or not, the cultural and economic weight of American Spanish is already enormous, and it's only going to grow. Spanish isn't flashy. It doesn't have the geopolitical drama of Mandarin or the demographic explosion of French, but it has something just as valuable: stability. It is spoken across stable, democratic, culturally influential nations. It's the second most popular language for international communication. And it's the only contender in this list that is already spoken at massive scale inside the world's sole superpower. Spanish won't replace English, but it will absolutely sit alongside it as an equal partner. Hindi, the dark horse. Here's the wild card that most Westerners completely overlook. India is on track to become the world's most populous country. It already has the fastest growing economy among major nations, and its tech sector is producing billion-dollar startups faster than almost anywhere else on Earth. Hindi is the primary language for around 44% of India's population, roughly 530 million native speakers. Conservative estimates put that number closer to 400 million, but even at the low end, that's a massive domestic market. When you include second language speakers, the total number of Hindi speakers in India rises to over 57% of the population. And it's not just India. Hindi is spoken across the diaspora in Nepal, Mauritius, Fiji, Trinidad, the UAE, the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. There's even a growing business case for learning Hindi inside India itself. The founder of the billion-dollar software company Zoho famously argued that not knowing Hindi is a serious handicap for engineers in Tamil Nadu who want to access northern markets. He told workers to ignore the politics and learn the language for career growth. But here's the problem. India is one of the most linguistically diverse countries on Earth. Hindi may be the most widely spoken language, but it competes for space with Bengali, Telugu, Marathi, Tamil, Urdu, and dozens of others. In the southern states, there's significant political resistance to Hindi imposition. English remains the language of power, prestige, and higher education across much of the country. Hindi has the demographic engine, it has the economic tailwind, but it's still just one voice in a very crowded room. And as long as India's elite continue to privilege English, Hindi will struggle to claim its place as a true global superpower. French, the African phoenix. Now, if you want a surprise, here it is. French is often dismissed as a language in decline. People assume it's fading, overtaken by English in diplomacy and business, but that assumption is based on a European perspective that is now about 3 decades out of date. The future of French isn't in Paris. It's in Kinshasa. It's in Abidjan. It's in Dakar. Sub-Saharan Africa is the youngest, fastest-growing region on the planet. And across large swaths of West and Central Africa, French is the language of business, education, and government. Today, over 60% of daily French speakers already live in Africa. By 2050, that proportion is expected to reach 80 to 85%. The projections are staggering. The Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie estimates that the number of French speakers worldwide could reach 700 to 750 million by 2050, more than triple today's count. Africa alone could contribute over 700 million of those speakers. Think about that. The fastest growing population in the world is increasingly being educated in French. These are not just casual speakers. They are young, tech-savvy, increasingly wealthy, and they are going to shape the 21st century in ways we're only beginning to understand. The percentage of the global population that speaks French is projected to rise from around 3% today to about 8% by 2050. That's not a decline. That's an explosion. Of course, French still faces competition. English and Mandarin are also vying for influence in Africa. China has poured billions into infrastructure projects across the continent, often with Mandarin language training attached. But French has a generational head start. It is already embedded in the education systems, the governments, and the cultures of dozens of African nations. French is not a dying European language. It is an African language that happens to have 70 million speakers in Europe. And that changes everything. The role of tech, soft power, and demography. You might have noticed something about all 4 of these languages. They didn't rise because they were grammatically superior or because their literature was prettier. They're rising because of raw demography, economic gravity, and cultural export. The global soft power rankings in 2025 tell a similar story. According to Brand Finance's annual index, the United States still holds the top spot for soft power, but China has surged to second place, surpassing the United Kingdom. That's not an accident. China's Belt and Road Initiative, its technology exports, and its aggressive cultural promotion are all creating demand for Mandarin. Meanwhile, several leading sociolinguists have identified a handful of languages, English, Spanish, Mandarin, and 1 or 2 others, that are currently in what they call a golden age, with rising usage, internationalization, and global influence. What's driving this? 3 things. First, demography. The countries where Spanish, Hindi, and French are dominant have young, growing populations. Europe and North America are aging. The language of the future will be spoken where the people are. Second, economics. The rise of non-English speaking economies, China, India, Brazil, is slowly chipping away at English's monopoly on global business. Companies that want to access these markets are discovering that English alone isn't enough. Third, digital inclusion. Technology has made translation easier, but it has also made it possible for smaller languages to thrive online. The internet is no longer an English-only space. Content in Spanish, Hindi, Arabic, and French is exploding across YouTube, Netflix, and social media. And when people consume media in their own language, they feel less pressure to abandon it for English. Why English isn't going anywhere. Let me be clear about something. This isn't a story about English dying. That's not happening. English will remain the world's primary lingua franca for the foreseeable future. It's the language of aviation, science, the internet, and international diplomacy. Over 1 billion people are still learning it. It's deeply embedded in global infrastructure. But the era when English was the only essential global language, the era when a native English speaker could travel anywhere and expect to be accommodated, that era is ending. More and more of the world's conversations are happening in multiple languages. A Brazilian businessperson negotiates with an Angolan supplier in Portuguese. A Kenyan trader switches between Swahili and English without thinking. A Spanish-speaking tourist in Miami never has to use English at all. This multilingual reality is not a problem to be solved. It's the future, and it's already here. So what does this mean for you? If you're a native English speaker, the comfortable era is over. For decades, you had it easy. The rest of the world learned your language. You didn't have to learn theirs. That's changing. In the coming years, speaking only English will no longer be a sign of privilege. It will be a disadvantage. Not because English is becoming less useful, it's not, but because the rest of the world is catching up. And they're catching up not just in English proficiency, but in their ability to operate in multiple languages while you're still fumbling with one. The winners of the next era will be those who can bridge linguistic and cultural divides. Not the monolingual English speaker, not the person who insists that everyone else adapt to them, but the person who can switch between Spanish and English, or Hindi and English, or French and English, depending on who they're talking to. That's the real shift. The world isn't choosing a new emperor, it's tearing down the throne altogether. The language that will dominate the 21st century isn't any single tongue, it's multilingualism itself. My pick. If you force me to choose, if you really, really want one answer, I'd pick Spanish. Not because it's the most dramatic or the most surprising, but because it's the most strategic. Spanish already has nearly 600 million speakers. It's spread across 20 countries. It's the official language of most of South and Central America. And by 2050, the United States will likely become the largest Spanish-speaking nation on Earth. Now that's the killer combination. When the world's most powerful economy becomes a majority Spanish-speaking country in many respects, Spanish stops being a foreign language. It becomes a domestic language of power. But here's the thing. Spanish won't dominate alone. It will rise alongside a booming French-speaking Africa, a fast-growing Hindi-speaking India, and an economically indispensable Mandarin-speaking China. The next global language isn't one language. It's 4, or 5, or 6. It's a constellation of major tongues, each powerful in its region, each capable of global reach, each demanding that English speakers finally learn something else. The bottom line. The question we started with, which language will be the next global superpower, turns out to be the wrong one. The right question is this: are you ready for a world where no single language rules alone? Where speaking English is no longer a ticket to everywhere? Where multilingualism isn't a hobby but a necessity? Because that world isn't coming in some distant future. It's already here. And the only question left is whether you'll adapt in time. Let me know in the comments. What language are you betting on? Or are you finally going to start learning one? I read every single one.